Well, we're in this great series that is primarily looking at Genesis 4 and trying to understand what does it mean to have this adventure with God, to do life with God. Because if you're going to be a follower of God, it's going to be an adventure. I promise you. It will be filled with unknown things. It will be filled with choices. It's a wonderful thing. And so we're talking a little bit about navigating all of that. I want to show you a picture. I want you to look at this picture and tell me what's the first word that comes to your mind. Not hunk, ladies, not hunk. Okay. No. What's the first word other than that comes to your mind? Freedom, yeah. Freedom! You know, I remember that. It's that scene, Freedom. We love that scene because it captures something about the human heart. The human soul longs for freedom. In fact, we were created for freedom when you start diving into Scripture. And I want to define freedom in this way here this morning because we're going to be talking about freedom. And it is this. Freedom is simply the unencumbered opportunity to fully live as the person Christ created you to be, without trying to earn it, without trying to merit it, but simply having the ability in an unencumbered way to just live fully as the person you were created to be in Christ. I love the way Paul gets at this idea. He says it in this way. He says, it is for freedom. Some of you, the translation you might have out of Galatians would say, it is for freedom's sake that Christ set you free. Christ set you free just for the sake that you were created to be free. And there's something we were created for, designed by our Creator for, and to live that life fully. That's freedom. That is what Christ wants us to experience. Now, with freedom always comes the opportunity, though, to rebel, to live contrary to the very nature by which Christ created you to be. And oftentimes when we rebel, that feels more like freedom sometimes. It's kind of me I'm going to go the way I want to go. But here's the truth. Rebellion is different than freedom in that rebellion always ends with some sort of mastery, whereby we're the ones being mastered by someone or something. And that's kind of what I want to unpack here this morning through this story found in Genesis 4. And we've been looking at a lot of different things with this. But remember, in Genesis 4, it starts off Cain and Abel, two brothers. They both bring an offering. And this offering in Hebrew is a very particular type of offering. It is an offering to worship God. And it takes the form of a grain offering. Sometimes it's referred to in Leviticus as a cereal offering. It's not like the Kellogg's type of cereal, but kind of a grain, something that you could eat. And so we pick up this story as they both bring this offering. And of course, God likes Abel's offering. If you have your Bibles, flip with me over to Genesis chapter 4. So they bring this offering. Chapter 4, verse 4 says this. But Abel, and this is interesting because Abel, he brings meat here. And it says this. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. He doesn't bring the typical offering, and there's not a rule against bringing meat to this particular type of offering, but it wasn't the precise way of doing this. And the text is letting us know a little something about Abel's heart. It says that he brings this offering from the first of his flock, and he brings the fat portions. In other words, he's not bringing like a New York strip or something like that. My wife likes that. I don't like that. I like a good T-bone steak or like a ribeye on the bone, real marbled, lots of fat, because that's where the flavor is. Okay. And the point here. Come on, any amens with that? Okay, there you go. Good. Yeah, I don't need chicken, What's happening here is Abel brings the first and the best, and even though it's not precise, the text is telling us something about his heart. He brings the first and he brings the best. It reminds me of a cat that I had growing up as a boy, I had this cat named Critter. He was a great big stocky cat, and he was a hunter par excellence. Okay, he was always hunting down rodents and such around our house, and every once in a while he would bring one to us as kind of an offering. Have you ever had a cat like this? And they're all proud of it, and they're going to give it to you. And so he'd bring lizards or horny toads or whatever. Well, one morning I wake up and Critter hops up on the back of my bed, and he brings me, I'm kidding you not, a great big rabbit leg. Just the leg, not the whole rabbit. Not a little foot like a keychain, a whole leg. And he's all, meow, there you go. And I'm just like, oh, okay. Right heart, not the best offering for me here this morning, and so in some ways, what we see here with Abel's heart is his heart. His heart is right. He brings the first and he brings the best. It may not be precise, but his heart is full of love for God. Now, in contrast to that, we see this picture of really the first bad boy of Scripture, okay? It's Cain. And if you look at back here at Cain's offering, verse 5, it says, but on Cain and his offering, and of course he brought what the text says is an offering of the first fruits of his crops. He brings the right offering technically, okay? And it says, but on Cain and his offering, he, being God, did not look on it with favor. And you can just picture Cain. It's like, what? My brother brings something that's not exactly correct, but I do. I bring the exact correct offering, and God doesn't accept it. And so what does the passage say? Look at the second half of verse 5. So Cain was very angry. Well, no kidding, he was angry. Of course he's angry. He's like, I did the technically the correct thing, and now God, you don't like it. But of course, what we're learning here is that there's something about Cain's heart that is askew. And what I love about this story here is that God invites Cain to have this little chit-chat with him. He gets to have this conversation, almost like they're sitting down in Cain's living room. They're both kicked back on the Barca-loungers. And God's going to have this chat with Cain. And I want you to catch this. He gives Cain the best advice ever, okay? He gives Cain some advice that if Cain will follow it, it will save him great misery in this world. And you know what? The same is true for you and me. There's some great advice here about how to do this adventure we called life. Okay? You got to catch this. So look with me again here at the passage. Look at halfway through verse 7. Verse 7 is where God says, now do the right thing. Do the right thing. And here comes the advice halfway through. He says, but if you do not do what is right, and here's the advice, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. This is some great advice that God gives Cain in this moment. God reads his heart, understands what's going on, and says, here's my advice. Okay? You got to understand this. Sin is crouching at your door, and you can't let it master you. You've got to master it. Now, here's the other thing you got to know about this. It's very interesting how the text describes sin. Most often, we think of sin as a verb, right? Sin is something you do or something you're not supposed to do, but that you do, right? It's a verb. Here, sin is not pictured as a verb. In fact, sin is personified. Sin is personified as like some sort of being crouching at the door, waiting to pounce you. Sin has a face. It is a stalker that's kind of coming after you. Now, to really get a feel for what the text is describing here, we made a little video. I got together with our executive pastor, Gary Schrader, and we made a video. And I said, Gary, you should be in this video, and you get to play the role of being the face of sin. Yeah, you get to be, it's your starring role. So Gary gets to play sin. I get to play Cain, okay, in this little miniature motion picture that describes how Genesis 4 pictures sin. So watch this video here.
And then the movies that were on this side of the hill, it was in Syria. But it just feels like, oh my gosh, it's the stuff I found. You know how the inspirational person
Gary makes a great executive pastor, but he's even a better stunt man. I think he could moonlight as a stunt man. That's okay, yeah. What Genesis 4 does here is so interesting. It doesn't just want to describe sin as some action you take that's wrong. It wants us to understand it wants us to have some depth to our understanding of sin. And what it's really doing here is helping us to understand that there is a sin nature that we must all contend with. And so here in Genesis 4, sin is personified. And as it does that, the big lie that gets exposed here is this. Doing life my way apart from God leads to real freedom. That's a lie. When I do life my way and think that that's freedom, it's really not. Because in the end, it will come back to master me. I won't be the master of it. Our crouching stalker, right? Our sin nature, uses our natural and healthy desire for freedom to master us. That's what's so awful about sin, is it plays on something good in us, a desire to be free, to be all we were created to be. It takes that desire and somehow twists it to actually steal freedom away from us. And we get deceived in how this works. Let me give you some examples of this because, right, we live in a world where we want our freedom, right? We live in a culture that says, hands off of me, hands off of my body, hands off of my choices. And we think that freedom is simply getting to do whatever I just want to do. But is that really freedom? I don't think it is. Let me give you some examples. And I'm gonna just start right off where it hurts a little bit here. Let me talk about money for a minute here. Freedom, we think in our culture, might be, I want the freedom to buy the things I want to buy with no restrictions. And if I want to use my credit cards as therapy, there's a lot of credit cards that used as therapy, right? That's right, yeah. Man, I'm having a bad day. I'm just going to go buy something and then I'll feel better, right? But the truth is that's a lie. Or I don't want to make a budget. If I do that, it might become apparent that I shouldn't buy some of those things that I want to buy. Or I don't want to give money to the church or to God or the marginalized. I want to spend all my money on me. Or worse, to spend more money on me than I have. I mean, when you think about credit card debt in America, it is really just people saying, I want to spend more money on me than what I actually have. And what I want to say in that moment is, no. Here's what's really going on. You're being stalked. That's what's happening. You're being stalked, and that voice, that desire that is leading you to use your money in that way, it will end up mastering you. It becomes bondage. When you spend hours and hours juggling minimum payments on all your credit cards, that's bondage. When you're getting harassed by creditors, that's bondage. When 25% of your income is used to pay off credit card interest, that's bondage. When financial stress and depression keep you from sleeping at night, that's bondage, not freedom. See, that's the lie. That is sin crouching at the door. Let me give you a couple of other examples that maybe hit at the realities of what we face in our culture. On the computer, late at night, we think freedom is getting to look at anything we want to look at. And there's a lot to look at on the World Wide Web, isn't there? Right, guys? There are things that can be very stimulating to the male brain on there. And sometimes we think, I should have the freedom to just to explore that and do whatever I want with that, okay? And I want to say, no. You're being stalked. Sin has a face, and it's trying to drag you down. When porn becomes a compulsion that you constantly must find ways to hide from those around you, that's bondage. When those images steal a little intimacy from your relationships, from your spouse, from the way you look at other people or co-workers or friends, that's bondage. When you spend every waking moment thinking of your next fix, that's bondage. See, it's not freedom. And sin longs to take advantage of your natural desire for freedom and twist it into something ugly. Let me give you one more example here. When your marriage feels a little, I'll pick on the ladies. I picked on the guy. I'll pick on the ladies here a little bit. When your marriage feels tired and old and you've stepped over, your last dirty sock as your husband belches once again in the living room, and you think to yourself, I've had it. This is not what I signed up for. And then you get like on Facebook, okay? Right? Some of you on Facebook. I just got on Facebook this week, so the very week that I get on Facebook is the week I'm going to pick on Facebook in my message. But you get on Facebook and suddenly you reconnect with an old high school friend, right? A tall, dark, former high school football star friend, right? The guy that all the girls wanted. And freedom, you think, is having a risky, tantalizing, vulnerable conversation because it makes you feel young and beautiful and noticed again. But the truth is, what you can never figure out on Facebook, at least I don't think you can, right, is that old, tall, dark football star, his muscles have turned to fat, and he traded in the Chevy Camaro for a minivan, okay? You think freedom is having it your way. And I want to say, no, no, no. You're being stalked. When it blows up your marriage, that's bondage. When years of child support and trading kids comes to that point where you get a grip on what it's doing with all the negative impact that it's having on your kids, the negative impact that it has on every kid of divorce, that's bondage. Years of learning to deal with all the problems that seem to follow you from one marriage to the next. And you know why that happens? It's because you went from one marriage to the our problem. Have you ever noticed that? This happens to me. My problems follow me wherever I go because, I'm the source of it. And when that follows you from relationship to relationship to relationship, that's bondage. See, we all have a stalker crouching at the door. And he will prey on our sense of freedom. But his purpose is always to master us, to bring us under its control, right? So the issue here is don't be mastered. Don't be mastered by that sin in your life because it's seeking to have you. In fact, I've got one more. I want to show you just the last frame there. Isn't that a great picture of Gary? Yeah. That's sin in our life, not Gary Schrader in particular, but that's what it is, right? It's seeking to have it. I'll put that video on my Facebook, okay? If I can figure out how to do that, you can go back and watch Gary take me out. Okay, so what we've got to get back to here is this idea of God says, don't be mastered by your sin. Rather, the opposite has got to occur. You've got to master it. And so what does that mean? By master it, is God saying that in our own strength we're to fight against that sin in our life? And the answer to that is simply no. No, that's not what plays out in the New Testament anywhere. That's not what plays out here. Remember, the heart of Genesis 4 is all about turning to worship and love God, to live in a relationship of trust and dependence on Him. So when God says, you've got to master this sin, Cain, He's not saying you go out in your own strength and take care of this. Because you know what? Here's what you'll learn, okay? It's what I've learned time and time again. Every time I try to fight against the sin in my life, it results in this. The sin in my life is a marathon runner, okay? It will always outlast me until I'm at a point where I'm tired or weak or more vulnerable. And no matter how much I can resist or fight off that sin in any one moment, if that's my only plan, to master it in my own strength, I will always lose. I'll always lose. The key here is what Genesis 4 is all about. It is about having a relationship where we turn toward God in His strength. Okay, so let me give you two bits of application here about how to master sin. The first one is this, and this comes from God gives us this advice. He wants Cain to understand this, and it is this. Simply put, tell yourself the truth. tell yourself the truth about the sins that you're vulnerable to in your life. And you can say, and this is good to say, this sin, whatever that sin is that's most tempting for you, this sin may feel good because sin always does, right? Satan's never trying to tempt us with what is not enticing to us. If it were a sin to eat asparagus and lima beans, good golly, my kids would be saints. They'd be up there with Mother Teresa and Billy Graham or something, right? But here's the deal. It's called a temptation because what? It's tempting, okay? There's something about it that really does feel good. And I think we have to acknowledge that it's getting at something in us that we do desire in all of this. But the truth is, when we give into that sin is a predator that is stalking us and seeking to hurt us, to drag us into bondage. So here's the second bet here, okay? We've got to be truthful with ourselves about what is tempting in our lives. But here's the other part. We've got to change our focus when we're dealing with sin in our lives. We've got to fight for, not against, okay? We've got to fight for something that is the right way to meet those needs that are going on in our heart, and not just fight against the temptation that's going on in our lives. Because again, if we do nothing but fight against those temptations, we lose. It's interesting what Paul says about this famous passage over in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And if you want, you can turn there, because there's powerful lesson here. It says this in verse 13, famous passage. He says, no temptation has seized you except for what is common to man. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, because we will all be tempted, right? We'll all be tempted. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. Underline, provide a way out there. Part of what I think he's getting at here is this. Most sin is an attempt to meet a legitimate need, only we're trying to meet it in the wrong way. Most sin is derived from us trying to meet a need for things like passion or intimacy, adventure, joy, security, love. And see, those are all good and healthy desires that should be met in our lives, okay? But sin is always trying to play off of one of those desires so that we might try to meet that desire in a destructive way, in a way that actually brings us into bondage, all right? And to really understand this, it's important to note that 1 Corinthians chapter 10, to keep this all in context, is really a chapter that starts off pointing at one particular sin, and that is the sin of idolatry. And that's important to know, so that when Paul says this, he's pointing at this sin of idolatry. And the reason that is important is because idolatry, in a strange way, plays into so many other sins. We don't often think of idolatry as being an issue, right? Idolatry we think of as just simply worshiping other gods. And we think, I don't have any other gods. You know, that's not my problem. I don't have a totem or an idol sitting in my living room or something. But understand idolatry in this way. Idolatry, and this may be a little confusing. Dallas Willard explains this better than me, but I want us to understand this, okay? Idolatry is attempting to meet our needs primarily for joy and security by assigning power to something other than God, and then holding that something accountable for making sure that we are secure and have joy in our lives. But here's what always happens. Whatever we assign that power to, we become enslaved to. See? And we start thinking these things are the answer for security and joy in our lives. And you know what? I'll argue that along with security and joy, with love, those are needs that need to be met in our lives. But idolatry says, instead of assigning power to God, we assign it to something else, and we're in bondage to it. And in ancient times, that was totems and idols, and they would worship this idol, and they would assign power to it, that it would make it rain, make their crops grow, keep them secure, safe, whatever. But primarily today, we do this with human systems and relationships. Things like politics, credit cards, career, church, our marriage, family, things like that. And we look to those systems to make sure that we have joy and security and even sometimes love in this world, okay? But at the end of the day, friends, you can't do this. At the end of the day, you can't assign power to your spouse to be responsible for your happiness. Because if you think your spouse is responsible for your happiness and security in this world, you're worshiping your spouse, and you will mess up your marriage. That is a perfect recipe for destroying a really good marriage. And so God says, don't have any other idols. It doesn't work in this world to empower other things in that way. And so Genesis chapter 4 is all about being people that find their freedom, not in assigning power to other things out there, but saying, God, I will turn and be a worshiper of you, and I will look to you to help me meet those needs in legitimate ways. So, my advice, don't fight against. Now I'm not saying don't worry about resisting sin. There are moments where we need to say, I'm going to try and resist this sin. But if that's all you've got, you're going to fail. Why not spend more time fighting for it? Turn to God and say, God, in you, what is a healthy way to meet these needs that I'm feeling? You know, if the spending's out of control, what legitimate need is behind that you're trying to meet? And say, God, help me find a healthy way to meet those desires. God, if there's some struggle that you've got with porn or Facebook or something that's leading you, a dozen other things, ask God, God, I want to turn to you. And what's the legitimate desire that's in my heart that I'm trying to meet in an illegitimate way? Can you help me find a healthy way to meet those needs in my life so that I don't come to be in bondage to those things, but that I can experience the freedom you created me to have? See the difference? Because if you can get into a pattern of turning to God and meeting those needs in your life, the temptation factor, the internet, Facebook, the credit card, they all become less and less tantalizing in your life because the needs are being met. And you start stealing power from those things in your life. But the key is turning toward God. He will be my God and my only God, and in him I will have freedom. So here's how I want us to end this morning. I want the worship team to come back out and lead us through this song, Freedom is Here, because that is truly what we receive in this redeeming relationship that we have with Christ. In Christ, friends, you get true freedom. So worship this morning with this song, and then I'm going to come back and close this out.